In the fall of 2019, I was 26 and freelancing as a graphic designer in Portland. Work was steady enough, but money always felt uncertain. More than anything, I needed quiet. My apartment sat above a bar, and between the late-night crowds and the couple who fought through the walls at 2 a.m., I could barely string a thought together. Deadlines piled up, and I caught myself staring at blank screens more often than working. So when my old professor mentioned his sister needed someone to house-sit for 3 weeks while she and her husband traveled to Europe, I didn't hesitate. No pets, no children, just watering plants and bringing in the mail. The pay wasn't great, but the promise of peace and space to work felt priceless. Her townhouse was tucked at the end of a narrow street lined with identical units. Hers shared a wall with one next door, but she assured me it had been vacant for months. "You'll have the whole place to yourself," she said with a smile when I picked up the keys. I settled in that first weekend, setting up my laptop in the upstairs office, stacking mail neatly on the counter, and learning where the creaky floorboards were. The quiet was startling at first, almost heavy, but I told myself it was exactly what I needed. Rain tapped the windows most nights, soft and rhythmic, and the occasional groan of wood felt natural in a house that age. For a few days, I almost forgot why I'd been desperate to leave my apartment. I worked late into the evenings, made tea, and read on the couch before bed. The silence wrapped around me like a blanket. At least it did until the fourth night. It was a Tuesday evening when I first heard it. Around 8:15, I was upstairs typing when a dull thump came through the shared wall. I froze. At first, I figured maybe the landlord had shown the unit without mentioning it. But then came another thump, followed by a dragging sound, faint and deliberate. I tried to shake it off. Old houses made strange noises, and sound carried differently in empty spaces. I told myself I was just jittery from too much coffee. But over the next hour, the noises came and went. Soft taps, uneven creaks, then silence. By 9:30, I heard what sounded like a door opening and closing. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, and I forced myself to peek through the upstairs window. The street was empty. No cars, no porch light, nothing to suggest anyone had gone inside next door. Uneasy, I made tea, wrapping my hands around the cup as if warmth could steady me. When I finally shut down my laptop near 11, exhaustion pushed me toward the guest room. I left the door cracked for airflow and slid under the blanket. That's when I heard it. Whistling, slow, steady, following a melody I didn't recognize. It wasn't muffled like it came from outside. It was clear, close, too close. My chest tightened. I sat up, straining to listen. The whistling wound through the walls, slipping down the hall toward the living room. I tiptoed to the doorway and eased it wider. The sound grew louder, filling the air until it pressed against my eardrums. Barefoot, I crept down the stairs with my phone clenched in my hand. The living room was dark, except for the glow of the television. I froze. I knew I had turned it off earlier. And then I saw him. A man sat in the armchair facing the blank television screen. His shoulders were hunched, his head tilted slightly as though he was listening for something. The faint blue glow outlined him in shadow. His hand gripped the armrest, and in that hand, I saw a metallic glint. A small handgun. The whistling poured from his lips, slow and tuneless. My breath caught, and I leaned back instinctively, hoping the darkness swallowed me before he turned. My first thought was to retreat quietly, slip back upstairs and lock the door. But then the sound stopped. Mid-note, silence fell so heavy I could hear my pulse pounding in my ears. I didn't need him to turn to know he was aware of me. My skin prickled with the weight of it, like I was already in his sights. I bolted. My feet slapped against the hardwood as I rushed the front door, fumbling with the locks. My hands shook so violently I nearly dropped my phone. I forced the deadbolt open, yanked the door wide, and stumbled barefoot into the rain. I ran until my lungs burned, until the glow of a street lamp offered some sense of safety. My hands were numb as I dialed 911. My voice cracked as I begged them to come quickly. Minutes later, red and blue lights washed over the townhouse. I stood drenched, hugging myself under the lamplight as officers slipped inside. Their radios crackled with clipped commands. Then one reported hearing the same eerie whistle echo through the dark. When they let him out in cuffs, he didn't resist. He just smiled, lips twisted, eyes gleaming like he'd been waiting all along. At the station, the man refused to give a name. He sat still, staring at the wall, as if the act of speaking was beneath him. Fingerprint scans revealed nothing, no matches, no record. It was as though he'd never existed on paper. The landlord insisted the adjoining unit had been locked and vacant for months, yet officers found the connecting door between the two homes forced open from the other side. They believed he had been living there, slipping back and forth unnoticed. I gave my statement, recounting every sound, every detail, the thumps, the dragging, the whistling, the moment I saw him in the chair. My words felt thin compared to the weight of what had happened. The officer listening nodded slowly, jotting notes, his expression carefully blank. When I returned to the townhouse under escort the next day to pack my belongings, I felt the walls pressing in on me. Every creak sounded like footsteps. Every shadow seemed sharper. I stuffed my clothes into my bag, grabbed my laptop, and left the key on the counter. I didn't look back as the door closed behind me. Back in my noisy apartment above the bar, the sounds that once annoyed me felt like a lifeline. I welcomed the slamming doors, the bass rumbling through the floor, the neighbors yelling down the hall. Silence no longer comforted me. Silence reminded me of that tune winding through the dark. For weeks afterward, sleep came in fragments. I'd jolt awake certain I heard whistling, certain he was sitting quietly in the corner waiting. Time dulled the edges but never erased it. Even now, years later, I sometimes dream of that night. In those dreams, the whistling drifts closer and closer until I open my eyes, half expecting to see the outline of a man in the corner of my room. Friends asked why I cut the job short, why I never went back. Some laughed it off as paranoia. Others leaned in with wide eyes, hungry for details. I rarely told the full story. Most people don't want to believe something like that can happen, that a stranger can slip into a place meant to be safe, sit in your chair, and whistle in the dark as if he's lived there forever. The police never contacted me again. No updates, no trial. As far as I know, he vanished into paperwork and shadows, nameless and unclaimed. Maybe he's still out there. Maybe he never left. The truth is, it doesn't matter where he is. What matters is what he left behind, the knowledge that safety is fragile, that silence can hide more than peace. I still live in Portland, still design from home. My apartment is smaller now, cheaper, tucked into a building with paper-thin walls. Every sound carries, arguments, laughter, music, footsteps at all hours. I wouldn't trade it for anything. Because silence, I learned, isn't always empty. Sometimes it's full of things you don't want to hear. We like to believe silence means safety, that quiet places offer peace. But sometimes silence is a mask, covering what moves unseen. If something feels wrong, if the stillness feels heavy, if your instincts whisper danger, listen. Trust the noise in your gut more than the quiet in the room. Because silence, I learned, can be the loudest warning of all. Looking back, I realized the summer of 2016 changed me in ways I didn't expect. I was 20, a college junior, worn thin from balancing classes, part-time work, and a roommate who treated our dorm like her personal stage. My parents had divorced 2 years earlier, and their constant bickering over the phone had turned home into another battlefield. So when the Whitakers, an older couple who lived in a sprawling Victorian house in Salem, asked me to house sit for 2 weeks while they traveled to Italy, I jumped at the chance. It wasn't just about the generous pay, though, that helped. It was about the space, the independence, and maybe even a little peace. The Whitaker house wasn't ordinary. Locals in town often muttered about its bad luck, the way you'd talk about a patch of road where too many accidents happen. I'd stayed there before on weekend jobs, feeding their 4 cats, but only during the day. I remembered the way the house seemed to breathe at night, the walls sighing, the floors settling like a restless sleeper. But I pushed those thoughts aside. I needed the money, and I told myself ghosts were for tourists and campfire stories. When I moved in that first evening, the air smelled faintly of lemon polish, as if the place had been scrubbed just for me. I unpacked in the guest room upstairs, placed my textbooks on the desk, and watched the cats circle me with curious eyes. For a few days, things felt normal. I made coffee in the mornings, kept up with my assignments, and fed the cats on their strict schedule. It almost felt like a vacation, until Ethan, my boyfriend, came over on the fourth night and broke the calm I'd convinced myself was real. Ethan wasn't the type to scare easily. He grew up hunting with his dad, spent summers working construction, and never shied from a fight if one found him. But the moment he stepped into the Whitakers' high-ceilinged living room, he seemed unsettled. "I don't like this house," he muttered over takeout cartons, his eyes flicking to the corners as if something might be hiding there. I laughed, trying to lighten the mood. "It's just old. Every floorboard makes a song." He didn't smile. "No, Maya, it's too quiet. It feels wrong." I rolled my eyes, though, truthfully, I'd felt the same thing in flashes. The silence here was heavy, like the house was listening. But I wasn't about to admit that. I was tired of people treating me like I was fragile. When Ethan pressed me to come back to his apartment for the night, I refused. "I'm not running from creaky floors," I said. His jaw tightened, but he let it go. He kissed me, wished me goodnight, and left with a final warning: "Lock everything." An hour later, brushing my teeth upstairs, I heard the living room TV power on. I figured I'd sat on the remote, so I went down, shut it off, and climbed back up. Within minutes, it flickered back on, static hissing like a swarm of bees. This time, I unplugged it, satisfied I'd won. But when I turned toward the stairs, I noticed a faint glow still pulsing against the hallway wall. The unplugged TV was alive, spitting static light across the empty room. That night, I dragged a blanket to the couch. The cats clustered around me, their warmth steadying my nerves. Sleep didn't come easy, though, not with that phantom glow seeping through the dark. The next evening, Ethan returned, stubborn as always. "If you won't leave, then I'm staying," he said, settling into the couch with the cats sprawled across his lap. We tried to laugh about the TV, tossing out theories about faulty wiring or ghosts who loved late-night channels. For a while, it almost felt normal, until the sound came. It started faint, a muffled cry from the basement. Not a meow, not a creak, but sharp and high-pitched. A baby's cry. I froze. "Did you hear that?" Ethan's face drained of color. "Yeah." My first thought was one of the cats had gotten stuck. My shelter work had taught me that frightened cats could sound eerily like infants. I counted quickly. 3 were here, but 1 was missing. My heart pounded as I grabbed the flashlight and descended the narrow kitchen stairs. The cry grew louder. At the bottom, I found the youngest cat pawing frantically behind the closed laundry room door. Relief surged through me. I scooped him up, pressing my cheek to his fur. When I returned upstairs, Ethan exhaled, shaking his head. "You're crazy for going down there." But later that night, as I washed dishes, the sound came again, louder, raw. Every cat was upstairs with Ethan, stretched across his lap. He held up his hands as if to prove it. "Don't," he warned as I grabbed the flashlight again. I ignored him. Step by step, I descended. The cries swelled, echoing through the cold, damp air, then cut off the instant I reached the basement floor. Silence. The smell of soil pressed into my nose. Then, without warning, the storm cellar door rattled violently, like something inside wanted out. I bolted up the stairs, my flashlight beam jerking across the walls. Ethan stood at the top, pale and wide-eyed, pointing toward the hallway. "They were all here," he whispered. The cats slinked nervously from the bedrooms, tails puffed. "None of them followed you down there." My stomach turned cold. The cries hadn't been from the cats at all. We sat in the living room debating what to do. Ethan argued for leaving immediately. I insisted on packing my things first. The conversation ended when the cellar rattled again, louder this time, followed by a dragging sound creeping up the basement steps. That was enough. Ethan grabbed my backpack. I shoved my textbooks and clothes inside, and we sprinted for the front door. I fumbled with the lock, my hands slick with sweat. Behind us, the dragging grew closer, heavy, deliberate. Finally, the door gave, and we spilled out into the night, locking it behind us. We didn't stop running until we reached Ethan's car. My chest ached from fear and sprinting, but all I could think about were those cries. How they had stopped the moment I reached the basement, as if whatever made them had been listening. For the rest of the Whitakers' trip, I only returned during daylight hours to feed the cats and change the litter. I ignored the strict feeding schedule Mrs. Whitaker had drilled into me. I wasn't about to stand in that basement again, not even for money. I left the lights blazing every time, never staying more than 20 minutes. When their return date came, I placed the keys under the doormat and texted a brief, polite thanks. I ignored Mrs. Whitaker's follow-up messages about future jobs. I wasn't setting foot in that house again. Weeks later, I was sitting in a coffee shop with my brother, who was home for the weekend. Casual conversation drifted toward summer jobs, and I mentioned the Whitaker house, half joking about the bad luck stories. He went quiet, stirring his drink too long. "I never told you," he said finally, "but I helped them move furniture years ago, down in that basement." His voice dropped lower. "I heard it too, Maya. A baby crying, clear as day. I didn't say anything because I knew you needed the money." The cup slipped in my hand, coffee sloshing onto the table. "You heard it?" He nodded, regret in his eyes. "Yeah, and I don't think it was a cat, or any kind of wiring." I wanted to argue, to cling to the idea that what I'd heard was explainable, but deep down, I knew. That sound wasn't something the living could make. It hadn't been a trick of wood or faulty pipes. It had been deliberate, a cry to be noticed, to remind us that the house's reputation wasn't just old superstition. Even now, when I think of the Whitaker place, I hear it faintly. That cry, soft, insistent, impossible to ignore. Sometimes we step into spaces carrying histories we can't see, shadows stitched into the walls long before us. It's easy to dismiss warnings as superstition or gossip, but not every danger wears a visible face. Trust your instincts. If a place feels wrong, if the silence feels heavy, if the air presses against you in ways you can't explain, leave. Money, pride, or stubbornness isn't worth what you might awaken by staying. The winter of 2018 feels like a lifetime ago now. I had just graduated high school that spring, and while most of my friends were celebrating college acceptance letters or planning road trips, I was worried about rent and groceries. My parents had been struggling for years, holding on by a thread after my dad's hours got cut at the factory. My older sister had already moved out, working 2 jobs in Buffalo just to stay afloat. That left me, 18 years old, trying to step into shoes that were way too big for me. I took whatever work I could find, shoveling driveways, hauling boxes, tutoring kids in math, but it never seemed like enough. So when Mr. Grayson offered me $250 in cash to watch his apartment for a weekend, I didn't hesitate. The place was in Rochester, tucked into a tired-looking complex on the edge of town. Paint peeled from the siding, the parking lot was pocked with ice and potholes, and the lobby smelled like damp carpet. But to me it looked like an opportunity. Grayson himself was a quiet man in his late 40s, pale, with watery eyes, and a voice that always seemed just above a whisper. He met me at the door Friday evening, pressed the money into my hand before I'd even set my bag down, and gave me a quick rundown. Feed the parrot in the living room twice a day. Make sure the heat stayed on. And don't open the locked back room, it was just for storage. That last instruction struck me as odd, but not odd enough to question. I figured everyone had secrets, maybe a messy room or heirlooms they didn't want touched. I nodded along, promised I'd respect his rules, and watched him shuffle out into the cold with a thin coat that didn't look nearly warm enough. I remember standing in the kitchen that first night, heating up a bowl of soup, thinking about how grateful I was for the cash. At the time, I didn't know that gratitude would curdle into something else, something I'd carry with me every time winter came back around. That first night, everything felt quiet enough. The parrot, a green and gray bird with sharp eyes, squawked every so often, repeating bits of phrases I couldn't quite place. "Help me," it cried once, then "hungry," in a voice that sent a shiver down my spine. I laughed nervously and told myself it was just mimicking something Grayson had said before. Parrots were weird like that, right? I sat up at the kitchen table with my old laptop, trying to finish an application essay for community college. The hum of the heating system filled the silence, and outside, snow pressed against the windows like soft white noise. For a little while, it was almost peaceful. But around 11, as I brushed my teeth, I noticed something strange. The bathroom mirror fogged over even though I hadn't used the shower. At first, I thought maybe the steam from the heater had condensed on the glass. But then I wiped it clean with the edge of my sleeve and saw faint letters smeared across the surface, almost like someone had written them with a finger. My stomach tightened as the words came into focus. "Don't look in the crib." I froze, toothbrush still in my hand, heart pounding in my chest. The rational part of me whispered that it was leftover residue, maybe Grayson's handwriting from weeks ago when the mirror fogged after a shower. But the other part of me, the part that had grown up listening to ghost stories at sleepovers, couldn't shake the unease. I forced a laugh at myself, muttered, "Get it together, Lucas," and went back to bed. The night passed without incident. I woke to the parrot shrieking, "Daddy's home" on repeat, its voice bouncing off the walls. I fed it like Grayson instructed, trying not to think about the mirror. But even as the bird crunched its seeds, the phrase clung to me like a shadow. Daddy's home. Daddy's home. The repetition felt less like mimicry and more like a warning. By the second evening, the apartment felt heavier somehow. The smell had changed too, a mix of rotting food and something sweeter, almost like baby powder. It made the back of my throat burn. I lit one of Grayson's candles, hoping it would help, but the scent only seemed to grow stronger. That night after dinner, I sat on the couch scrolling through my phone when I noticed the hallway door at the far end was cracked open. The locked storage room. My first thought was that maybe I'd bumped it somehow, but no, I'd never even touched it. I stood slowly, my heart thudding in my ears. "Hello?" I called softly, though I wasn't sure who I expected to answer. Silence. The parrot squawked behind me, "Daddy's home!" Its wings fluttered, and I swear its eyes followed me as I inched toward the door. My fingers trembled as I nudged it open. The room inside wasn't storage at all. The peeling wallpaper looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. A crib sat against the far wall, draped with a dingy blanket. Toys lay scattered on the floor, coated with dust. My breath caught when I saw what was inside the crib. A small bundle, wrapped tight in stained fabric. It didn't move. It didn't make a sound. I staggered back, my hand flying to my mouth. 1,000 thoughts tangled together. Was it a doll? An animal? Something worse? My chest tightened with the urge to run, but my legs wouldn't move. Then the front door creaked open. I whipped around, my stomach twisting. Mr. Grayson stood in the doorway, but something was wrong. He wasn't dressed for winter, just an oversized t-shirt and what looked like a diaper hanging loose around his waist. And in his right hand, glinting under the weak ceiling light, was a kitchen knife. "You weren't supposed to see the baby," he whispered. I froze. My mind screamed at me to run, but my body wouldn't obey. Grayson took one slow step forward, the knife catching the light. His smile stretched too wide, too calm for what was happening. "It's feeding time," he muttered, his voice breaking into a tremor. "Daddy's hungry too." The parrot shrieked behind me, repeating his words in a warped echo. "Feeding time! Feeding time!" Something inside me snapped. Adrenaline surged, and my legs finally listened. I bolted down the hallway, knocking over a toy truck as I slammed the door to the back room shut behind me. My hands shook as I fumbled with my backpack on the kitchen counter, but the thought of staying even 1 second longer sent me toward the window above the sink. I shoved it open, icy air rushing in, stinging my face. Grayson's footsteps dragged closer, each one deliberate. I swung my leg over the sill, scraping it raw against the frame. Behind me, his voice rose into a shrill cry. "Don't leave, Daddy." I dropped onto the fire escape, the metal slick with frost. My feet slipped, but panic kept me upright. I scrambled down the stairs, skin burning from the cold. Halfway down, I lost my balance and tumbled the rest of the way, hitting the ground hard. Pain shot through my side, but I didn't stop. I sprinted barefoot down the icy street, gasping for air, until the neon glow of a gas station lit up the corner. I burst through the doors, half crying, begging the clerk to call 911. By the time the police arrived, Grayson was gone. They searched the apartment, their faces grim as they pulled back the blanket in the crib. Inside were the mummified remains of a child, small and fragile, surrounded by dust-covered toys. The officers exchanged looks I'll never forget, ones that confirmed the nightmare was real. I gave my statement to the police that night, every detail spilling out between shivers. They asked me to describe Grayson, his voice, the knife, the diaper. Each word made me feel sicker, like I was dragging the horror out into daylight where it could no longer be denied. Neighbors claimed they saw him slip out the back just before the squad cars arrived. The police searched for weeks, checking shelters, bus stations, even hospitals, but he was never found. It was like he'd dissolved into the winter air, leaving only that apartment behind as proof. The officers told me the remains in the crib had been there for years, maybe a decade. They never confirmed if it was Grayson's child or someone else's. The only other clue was the piles of adult diapers, food wrappers, and bottles stuffed in the closet. He'd been living there in some twisted fantasy world, pretending to be both father and child. For months after, I had nightmares. I'd wake to the sound of the parrot's voice echoing in my head, repeating Daddy's home in that flat, mocking tone. I couldn't look at cribs in department stores without my stomach turning. I avoided babysitting jobs, avoided walking past that apartment complex, avoided even mentioning the name Grayson. Even now, years later, when I hear a parrot mimic human speech, my chest tightens. The smell of baby powder makes me want to gag. Some memories don't fade. They brand you. I never took another house-sitting job again. That weekend taught me more than just the weight of fear. It showed me how thin the line is between ordinary life and horror, how a single unlocked door can unravel everything you thought was safe. Some opportunities look harmless on the surface, easy money, a simple favor, nothing to fear. But trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, if the rules don't add up, walk away. No amount of money is worth opening the wrong door. Sometimes survival isn't about being brave. It's about listening to the quiet warnings your gut has been screaming all along. I never thought of myself as the type to scare easy. I grew up in Denver, Colorado, a city that balanced mountain quiet with urban noise. Our neighborhood was safe enough, porch lights on, kids biking in cul-de-sacs, parents chatting by mailboxes. By the time I was 17, I'd spent countless evenings home alone, or babysitting for neighbors who trusted me. So when the Parkers, who lived just 4 houses down, asked me to house sit one Saturday night in the spring of 2021, I didn't hesitate. They were going to a charity gala downtown. No pets, no kids, just wanted a body in the house to keep burglars away. For $80 cash plus pizza money, I figured I was set. I remembered that house from years earlier. I'd played Xbox there with their son when we were younger before they moved away for a while and came back. The place always felt bigger than it really was. Narrow staircase leading upstairs, 3 bedrooms, and one of those attics with a pull-string ladder right in the hall. Mr. Parker chuckled as he handed me the keys. Don't let the attic spook you. Old beams creak in the wind. Nothing to it. I arrived around 6, tossed my backpack on the couch and made myself comfortable. Rain tapped at the windows as the sun slid behind the Rockies. By 9, I was eating a frozen pizza, watching an action flick, and texting my girlfriend, Kelsey. The house creaked every now and then, but I brushed it off. Then came the sound I couldn't ignore. A dull thud, directly above me. I muted the TV, staring up at the ceiling. Another thud, this one sharper, almost like a door shutting. My stomach sank, and for the first time that night I felt small inside those walls. I told myself it was the storm. Wind can make any old house sound alive. Still, curiosity gnawed at me. I climbed the narrow staircase, each step groaning beneath my weight. The upstairs hallway was dim, shadows stretching across the carpet. All 3 bedroom doors were closed, just how the Parkers had left them. Then I noticed the attic string. It was swaying, not wildly, but like it had just been touched. My breath caught in my throat. "Hello?" I called softly, though I regretted it immediately. My voice sounded too thin, too easy to answer. Nothing came back. I backed into the bathroom and splashed water on my face. "Get a grip," I muttered. "It's just a draft." Still, I couldn't shake the image of someone standing above me, listening. Back downstairs, I turned on the little baby monitor they'd left on the counter. "It's good for listening if the house makes noises," Mrs. Parker had joked. I figured the static would be white noise to calm me. But then, cutting through the crackle, came a whisper. My name. Daniel. Every hair on my neck stood up. The monitor sat silent again, as though daring me to believe what I'd heard. I grabbed my phone and texted Kelsey. "You up? Weird stuff here." The message hung unsent. Service was lousy in their house. I dialed anyway, but the signal dropped before it rang. I was debating whether to leave when I heard another sound. A faint creak, followed by the attic ladder scraping against its frame. I crept halfway up the stairs again. The attic door, which had been shut minutes earlier, was now cracked open. Just an inch, but enough. Panic surged. I bolted into the guest room, shoved a chair under the knob, and pressed my weight against it. My heartbeat thundered in my ears, drowning out the rain. The silence stretched, broken only by the storm rattling against the windows. I gripped my phone like a lifeline, trying again to reach 911. This time, a faint signal connected. Whispering into the receiver, I explained, "There's someone in the house, upstairs. Please send help." The operator's calm voice steadied me, promising officers were en route. Then the doorknob rattled, slow at first, then violent. The chair scraped against the floor as pressure built on the other side. I held my breath, pushing back with all my strength. Footsteps thundered in the hallway, heavy and fast. They stopped directly outside the door. Silence. Then came a new sound, a scraping in the ceiling vent above me. Long, deliberate, like nails dragging across metal. My chest tightened. Whoever it was, they weren't just in the hallway. They were above me, too. I whispered into the phone, "Please hurry. Please." The operator repeated instructions. Stay quiet. Stay hidden. Easier said than done when your entire body shakes like a loose branch in the wind. Suddenly, the footsteps retreated, pounding back toward the attic. The door rattling stopped. For a few agonizing minutes, nothing moved. I almost convinced myself they'd left. Then, faintly through the vent, I heard laughter. Low. Whispered. Like someone thought this was a game. The storm outside grew heavier, masking the sounds within the house. I pressed my ear to the floor, straining to hear sirens. Instead, I caught something else. The creak of the attic ladder being pulled shut. Whoever was up there wanted to disappear again, and that thought chilled me more than the idea of them breaking down the door, because it meant they'd done this before. Flashing red and blue lights finally bled through the rain-streaked windows. Relief crashed over me so hard I nearly collapsed. I yanked the chair from the door and stumbled out into the hallway just as 2 officers charged up the stairs. "Daniel Walsh?" one barked. "Yes," I whispered. my voice trembling. They moved quickly, clearing the rooms, then pulling down the attic ladder. Guns drawn, flashlights cutting into the dark, they climbed. Minutes felt like hours until one called down. "We got something." I hovered at the bottom of the stairs, my legs shaking. They emerged not with a suspect, but with evidence: food wrappers, water bottles, and a filthy blanket. One officer held up a cracked flip phone they'd found wedged under the insulation. "We'll need to process this," he said firmly. The Parkers arrived not long after, drenched from the rain. Mrs. Parker clutched her husband's arm, eyes wide when the police explained. "Someone's been living in your attic," the officer said. "Likely for weeks, maybe longer." Mr. Parker's jaw tightened. "We thought it was just the house settling, God help us." One of the officers scrolled through the flip phone. His expression hardened. "Photos," he muttered. He turned the screen to show me, a grainy shot of the living room. Me sitting on the couch just hours earlier, taken from outside the window. My knees buckled. That meant whoever was in the attic hadn't just stayed hidden. They'd been watching. The Parkers were pale as ghosts. Within a week, they'd list the house for sale. That night, though, we all stood in the rain, staring up at the windows like they stared back. I didn't sleep much after that night. Even at home, even with my own family nearby, the silence of the house pressed down like a weight. I kept hearing that whisper through the static, my name stretched into something unfamiliar. Kelsey tried to comfort me over the phone. "It's over now. They didn't hurt you?" "Not yet," I muttered. The thought slipped out before I could stop it. Because what haunted me wasn't just what happened. It was knowing how long it must have gone on before I noticed. How many times had I walked through that house, unaware someone was just a few feet above me listening? Weeks later, I learned the police never caught him. The evidence was bagged, but the attic squatter vanished like smoke. I hated thinking about the fact he might have watched another family before, might be watching someone else now. I finished my senior year, graduated, tried to put the memory behind me, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw that attic string swaying. I heard the nails scraping across the vent, and most of all, I felt the doorknob twisting beneath my hand, the certainty that someone on the other side wanted in. Even now, years later, the memory lingers. I can't sit in a quiet house without checking the attic, the basement, the closets. Because safety isn't something I take for granted anymore. I was 17 just trying to make $80. But that night taught me the kind of lesson you don't forget. Danger doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it hides above your head. We often convince ourselves that safety is permanent, when in reality it's fragile. Trust your instincts, even when they seem irrational. Pay attention to the small signs, the creaks, the whispers, the things that feel off. Ignoring them might cost more than peace of mind. Real caution isn't paranoia, it's survival. I was 22 the summer it happened, working as a line cook at a small seafood place in Mobile, Alabama. The pay was lousy, the hours long, but I was desperate to keep my car from dying for good. My manager, Rick, must have noticed, because one night after a shift he pulled me aside. "Evan, you still need cash, right?" "Always," I said, wiping grease from my hands. He explained he and his wife were going to Florida for a week and needed someone to stay at their house. No kids, no big responsibilities, just feed their dog, bring in the mail, and make it look lived in. $400 cash, plus they'd stock the fridge. I didn't even have to think. "Yeah, I'll do it." Their place was on a quiet street I knew well, down the hill from a small church near a creek that ran behind several houses. It was nicer than anywhere I'd ever lived. 3 bedrooms, tidy yard, all the things you imagine belong to people who have their lives together. Rick's dog, Cooper, was a huge brown mutt who barked like he owned the world, but melted if you scratched behind his ears. The first few days were simple enough. I liked the solitude, cooking breakfast without hearing the neighbors through paper-thin walls, At night, though, the storms came. Late August in Alabama is brutal. Humidity thick enough to choke you, followed by downpours that shook the windows. Cooper hated it. He'd curl at my feet trembling, and I'd crank up the TV to drown out the thunder. By the fourth night, the storm was the worst yet. Rain came down in sheets. The creek swelled until water spread into the backyard. I remember thinking it looked almost like a shallow lake. That's when I saw her. I'd just finished a sandwich and was heading back to the couch when Cooper stiffened. His ears pricked, his growl low and steady. He faced the sliding glass door that led to the backyard. "What's up, boy?" I asked, but my voice was thin. I followed his gaze and froze. There was a figure in the yard. Through the rain, I could barely make her out. At first, she looked like a woman standing ankle-deep in the water, arms jerking wildly, almost like she was waving for help. My heart jumped. I thought maybe her car had gone off the road, or she'd gotten stuck in the storm. I slid the door open a crack, rain blowing into my face. "Hey, you need help?" I shouted. No answer, just the storm roaring. She kept splashing her hands in the water like she was playing. The sight twisted something deep in my gut. Nobody acts like that in the middle of a flood. I shut the door fast and locked it. Cooper barked once, then backed away, whining. I stood there, gripping the handle, my pulse hammering. I told myself maybe it was a trick of the rain. Maybe I was seeing things. Minutes passed. I paced the kitchen, every nerve stretched tight. When I finally gathered the courage to peek again, she was gone. The yard was empty. Relief poured through me like warm air. I laughed at myself, forced, shaky. See? Nothing. I turned off the kitchen light and went back to the couch. The slasher movie still played. Some actor screaming on screen, but I wasn't watching anymore. I just wanted the night to end. That's when I heard it, splashing. Not outside, inside the house. At first I thought I'd imagined it. I muted the TV, holding my breath. The sound came again. Wet slaps against the tile like bare feet or hands moving through water. "Cooper?" I whispered. He bolted upstairs, nails clicking hard against the wood, tail tucked. That's when my stomach dropped. If he was scared, I wasn't imagining it. I grabbed the flashlight Rick kept by the counter. My hand shook so badly I almost dropped it. Step by step, I edged toward the kitchen, the beam slicing through the dark. The storm outside hammered against the glass, but inside the noise was worse. Dragging, splashing, like something crawling across the floor. The light caught her. She was on all fours, drenched, hair plastered to her face. Her hand slapped the tiles, leaving wet streaks behind. She looked up and her face, pale, hollow-eyed, dripped with creek water. She let out a sound I'll never forget. A squeal, high and guttural like a pig being slaughtered. It rattled the walls. I dropped the flashlight and ran. Up the stairs, two at a time, heart jackhammering. I burst into the guest bedroom I'd been sleeping in, slammed the door, and shoved a dresser against it. Cooper scrambled under the bed, whining. I fumbled for my phone and dialed 911, whispering into the receiver. "Someone's in the house, please, I don't know how she got in." The dispatcher's calm voice barely cut through my panic. "Stay on the line, officers are on the way." Below us, I heard her moving. Slow, dragging footsteps across the hardwood. Then the stairs creaked. She was coming up. The dispatcher kept talking, but I barely heard her. My focus was on the door, on the sound of each step up the staircase. Thud, pause, thud, each one closer. Cooper whined louder, pressed flat against the floorboards. The sound stopped outside my door. Silence stretched until it felt unbearable. Then came a cough, wet and rattling, followed by another squeal, softer this time, almost like she was laughing. I pressed harder against the dresser, whispering, "Please hurry, please." Then everything went quiet. I stayed frozen, phone pressed to my ear, listening to the storm outside, the hum of my own breathing. Every creak of the house made me flinch. Finally, the dispatcher said, "Officers are pulling up now. Stay where you are until they reach you." Flashing red and blue lights painted the blinds. Heavy knocks rattled the front door downstairs. "Police!" I wanted to run to them, but I didn't dare move until they found me. A voice called from the hall minutes later. "Evan Price? You in there?" I shoved the dresser aside and opened the door with shaking hands. 2 officers stood in the hallway, rain dripping from their jackets. Relief hit me so hard I nearly collapsed. They swept the house, every room, every corner. Nothing. No woman, no footprints on the stairs, no forced entry. The kitchen tiles were dry, as if no water had ever touched them. "Could have been the storm, son," one officer said, though his eyes flicked to the soaked flashlight lying in the corner. Then he noticed my sneakers by the couch. They were drenched, dripping as though they'd been pulled from a river. I couldn't stay after that. I packed a bag and drove to a cheap motel off the interstate, Cooper riding shotgun with his head in my lap. I only went back to Rick's house during daylight, long enough to feed the dog and grab mail. Nights were out of the question. When Rick and his wife returned, I handed over the keys and muttered something about a family emergency. He tried to hand me the cash, but I pushed it back. "Don't worry about it." I never told him what happened. What was I supposed to say? That a woman crawled out of the flood and into his kitchen? That she squealed like some animal from hell and left my shoes waterlogged? No way he'd believe me. Years later, I still can't sit easy during a storm. The sound of rain against glass makes me nauseous. Thunder rattling the sky pulls me right back to that kitchen, watching her crawl across the tiles. Sometimes when it rains hard enough, I swear I hear it. The squeal. Faint. Wet. Crawling closer. I tell myself maybe it was stress, lack of sleep, a trick of lightning and shadow. But deep down, I know what I saw. And I know it wasn't human. Fear teaches us truths we don't want to face. Danger doesn't always knock on the door. It can slip in quietly through cracks we don't expect. Trust your instincts, respect the unease that rises in your gut, and never dismiss the warnings nature gives. Ignoring them may cost more than comfort. Sometimes survival means believing the impossible, because safety lives in caution, not denial. I was 29 in the fall of 2020, just weeks out from knee surgery after tearing my ACL in a co-ed softball game. My doctor told me to take it easy, keep the brace on, and avoid too much movement. But when you're staring at bills piling up, medical advice gets pushed down the list. So when a couple from the clinic where I worked asked if I could house sit for them over a weekend, I said yes. They were middle-aged, new to Asheville, and proud owners of a freshly built 2-story house in a development near the edge of town. They were headed to Chicago for a wedding, and all they wanted from me was the basics. Bring in the mail, water the plants, keep the lights on. $300 for 2 nights. They even joked about leaving me their Netflix login so I could binge watch while my knee iced. The neighborhood looked like something out of a real estate brochure. Neat lawns, modern porches, the faint smell of cedar still clinging to the wood. They had a security system too, which they bragged about. "You'll be fine here," they said. "This neighborhood's safe." The first night went smoothly. I boiled pasta, fed their goldfish, and stretched out in the guest room with a heating pad buzzing against my swollen knee. I slept deeply until something yanked me awake around 2 in the morning. It wasn't a sound at first. It was a smell, a sharp, artificial sweetness that hit the back of my throat. Axe body spray. I hadn't smelled it since high school, when every boy in the locker room seemed to drench themselves in it. The familiarity of it was so out of place that my stomach tightened. That's when I noticed the back door wasn't fully shut. I hobbled downstairs on my crutches, the brace squeaking with each step. My first thought was maybe I'd forgotten to latch it, but I was sure I had checked it earlier. The back door was cracked open barely an inch, enough for cold air and the smell to seep in. I locked it quickly, rearmed the alarm system, and stood there, my heart in my throat. I didn't hear anyone outside. Just rain dripping from the gutters and the faint hum of crickets. Trying not to sound panicked, I texted the couple. "You guys didn't leave a can of Axe spray around, did you? Brings me back to 2008, LOL. No response. I went back upstairs, telling myself maybe a neighbor's kid had sprayed it outside. But as I lay in bed, another noise drifted through the house, a faint scraping sound, like fingernails dragging inside a closet. I told myself it was the house settling. I pressed the pillow over my head until I fell asleep again. Morning light made me braver. I walked through the house, checking doors and windows. Everything was locked, but then I saw it. The recycling bin that had been wedged tight against the outside of the back door had been moved. It wasn't tipped over, just shifted a few feet away, leaving marks in the damp grass. That smell still lingered faintly in the air. I tried to shake it off, spent the day streaming shows and stretching my knee, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. My crutches leaned against the wall like they might actually protect me if I needed them. By dinner, I told myself I was being ridiculous. The neighborhood was brand new, safe, secure. But when the lights flickered that night, plunging the house into darkness, my hands started to shake. I was microwaving leftovers when it happened. A hum, a flicker, and then the whole house went black. My phone's flashlight was the only thing between me and the dark. I cursed under my breath, maneuvering on my crutches, trying not to trip. That smell returned, thicker now, sour under the sweetness. Axe, heavy and suffocating. My stomach twisted as my light swept over the living room. Then it happened. The closet door slammed open. A tall man burst out, his clothes dark and wet-looking, beard matted, eyes wide and wild. The smell rolled off him in waves, choking me. He didn't speak, didn't pause, just bolted straight past me. I stumbled backward, falling against the counter, pain shooting through my knee. My crutches clattered to the floor. The back door banged open. He vanished into the night. I scrambled for my phone, heart in my throat. My voice shook as I told the dispatcher. There was a man in the house. He came out of the closet. He ran out the back. Please, please hurry. Cooper, the goldfish, swam lazy circles in his bowl while I sat trembling, flashlight shaking in my hand. Every second felt like an hour until blue and red lights flashed through the windows. Officers moved through the house with beams of light, guns drawn. They checked the doors, windows, every room. When they came back, one of them shook his head. No signs of forced entry, nothing broken. Another officer frowned at the keypad by the door. The alarm was disarmed, manually. I felt sick. That meant he hadn't broken in at all. He had a key. I sat at the kitchen table while the officers took notes, my hands still trembling. One of them asked, "Did he say anything? Threaten you?" "No," I whispered. "He just ran." It almost sounded worse when I said it out loud. He hadn't touched me. He hadn't stolen anything. He had just been waiting there silent inside the closet while I went about my night. The officers asked about spare keys and I could only shrug. It's not my house. I'm just watching it. They promised to increase patrols in the neighborhood, but their faces told me what I already knew. Without forced entry or evidence, there wasn't much they could do. The couple returned the next day, horrified. I told them everything, from the smell to the closet door. The wife covered her mouth, eyes wide. The husband rubbed his forehead. Finally, he admitted, "One of our spare keys went missing months ago. We thought we just misplaced it. We didn't think it mattered." They called a locksmith before I even left, but for me, the damage was already done. I packed my bag and crutched out without looking back. That night in my own apartment, I sat awake until dawn, staring at my front door. Every creak of the building made me flinch. I could still smell it, faint but persistent, like the scent had sunk into my skin. For weeks afterward, I dreamed of opening closets and finding him crouched inside, waiting. It's been years now, and I've never taken another house-sitting job. Friends have asked, co-workers too, and I always say I'm too busy. But the truth is simpler. I can't. The memory of that weekend is stitched into me too deep. The couple moved not long after. They never mentioned if the police found anything. I doubt they did. People like him don't leave traces. They just vanish, carrying their smell with them. I still walk with a faint limp when the weather shifts, a reminder of the brace I wore that night. Sometimes when I'm in a crowded grocery store or passing strangers on the street, the air shifts, and I catch it, that unmistakable cloud of Axe spray. For a second, I'm back in that dark house, heart hammering, waiting for the closet door to crash open again. I know it's irrational. I know it's just some teenager trying too hard to smell good. But my body doesn't care. My throat closes. My palms sweat. I look over my shoulder. Because once you've lived through it, you realize safety isn't in locks or alarms or neighborhoods. It's an illusion that disappears the moment someone decides they want to step through it. That weekend taught me something I'll never forget. Danger doesn't always come with noise. Sometimes it waits, breathing quietly behind a closed door. We often treat safety as a guarantee, something we can buy with locks, alarms, or the comfort of a quiet neighborhood. But true safety is fragile, and our instincts matter more than the systems around us. Trust the uneasy feeling when something doesn't fit, because sometimes the only warning you get is the smallest one. The faintest smell, the tiniest sound, the gut telling you not everything is as it seems. The summer of 2014 was supposed to be simple for me. I had just finished another year at community college and was trying to save a little extra cash before classes started back up. My aunt lived in Fairfield, Ohio, and she was the one who set me up with the Andersons. They were a middle-aged couple in their early 50s who lived right next door to her. They were heading out of town for a family reunion and needed someone to watch the house for a weekend. No dogs, no cats, just water the flowers, grab the mail, and keep an eye on things. When you're 20 and broke, that sounds like the easiest paycheck in the world. Their place was one of those split-level homes that look frozen in time, with tan siding, a trimmed lawn, and a mailbox that leaned just slightly. The cul-de-sac itself was quiet. Kids still rode their bikes until the streetlights flicked on. Neighbors waved when they drove by. It looked like the kind of place where nothing bad could ever happen. But there was always a shadow on that street, and it lived directly across from the Andersons. His name was Mr. Caldwell, late 40s, maybe 50. He kept to himself mostly, but when he did talk, people said he didn't know when to stop. My aunt once whispered to me over coffee that he gave her the creeps. I had noticed it too. Sometimes when I was at my aunt's house, I'd catch him standing at his front window, staring. I told myself it was nothing. People get lonely. Maybe he was just awkward. I wasn't scared, at least not yet. I thought this weekend was going to be easy money, a couple days of quiet. I couldn't have been more wrong. The first evening felt almost peaceful. I watered the begonias in the front yard, waved at a couple of neighbors, and then ordered Chinese takeout. By 8 o'clock, I was curled up on the Andersons' couch with my laptop open, waiting for the knock on the door that would mean dinner had arrived. When the knock finally came, I didn't even bother checking. I swung the door open, expecting sesame chicken. Instead, it was Caldwell. He stood there in a sweat-damp shirt, his smile stretched too wide. "Evening, Hannah. Didn't expect to see you here. Where are the Andersons off to?" I felt my stomach tighten. "They're out of town for a reunion. I'm just helping out," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. His eyes flicked past me into the house. "All alone in there?" His tone was casual, but it felt like a test. My heart thumped. I lied quickly. "No, my boyfriend's upstairs. He's showering." For a split second, his smile slipped. Then it returned. "That's good. Smart girl. Shouldn't be alone in a house like this. Never know who's watching." He lingered until I finally nodded and pushed the door closed. Minutes later, the delivery guy showed up for real, but my appetite was gone. I locked every door, checked the windows, and texted my aunt. Her reply was short. "Keep the doors locked. Don't talk to him again." Around 11 that night, when I was brushing my teeth upstairs, another knock came. I froze, then peered through the blinds. Caldwell was at the door again, this time without a smile. He just stood there, knocking slowly, staring at the wood. I didn't move until he turned and drifted back across the street. Sleep didn't come easy that night. By morning, I tried convincing myself it wasn't as bad as it felt. Maybe he was just lonely. Maybe the whole thing was me overreacting. I ate breakfast, watered the flower beds again, and spent most of the day half watching TV. The neighborhood seemed calm. Cars came and went. Kids tossed a basketball in the driveway across the cul-de-sac. Normal life made me second-guess my nerves. Still, I couldn't shake the image of him knocking long after dark. The way his voice had dropped when he said, "Never know who's watching." It sat in my chest like a stone. I texted a friend from school, told her I was house-sitting and felt spooked. She joked that I should just grab a bat and sleep with it. I laughed, but later that night I actually carried one up to the Andersons' spare bedroom. At around 9:30, I FaceTimed my aunt. She tried to ease my nerves, told me Caldwell had always been a little odd, but mostly harmless. "If he comes around again, don't answer, just call the police," she said. Her reassurance didn't erase the unease. When the house got quiet, every creak in the floorboards made me stiffen. I kept the lights on in the living room, hoping it might keep him away. Around 10:15, just as I was starting to think maybe the night would pass quietly, I heard it. A faint tapping, not from the front, but from the back of the house. My skin prickled. I turned slowly toward the sliding glass door. That's when I saw him. Caldwell's face pressed against the glass, his breath fogging it up. My blood went cold. I didn't think. I just grabbed my phone and crouched behind the couch, whispering into the receiver as I dialed 911. "There's a man outside the house. He's at the back door. Please send someone." The dispatcher's voice was calm, steady, guiding me through the panic. "Stay on the line. Officers are on their way. Is the door locked?" "Yes," I whispered. My heart hammered so loudly I thought he might hear it through the glass. Caldwell tapped again, harder this time. His voice seeped through the thin door, low and unsettling. "Come on, Hannah. Open up. Don't make me wait." I clutched the phone so tightly my knuckles ached. The dispatcher told me to stay quiet, stay hidden. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Then headlights splashed across the windows. Caldwell vanished. 2 officers entered, searching the house with flashlights. I could barely explain between shaky breaths. They checked the backyard and found faint shoe prints in the damp soil. The tracks didn't head toward the street. They went to the side fence where the boards were cracked, just wide enough for someone to slip through. One officer asked if I knew him. I nodded. "He lives across the street." They exchanged a glance, but didn't say much. When they left, the silence in that house felt heavier than ever. I sat awake until the sun started to creep up, the bat still in my hands. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard his voice at the door. The Andersons came home that afternoon. Their smiles faded quickly as I told them everything. Mrs. Anderson kept a hand over her mouth while her husband's jaw tightened. "We should have warned you," he admitted. Years ago, Caldwell was questioned about a missing girl from a nearby town. They couldn't prove anything. He's been here ever since. I felt sick. Why didn't anyone say something? He shook his head. We thought it was behind us. Thought maybe he was just strange. I'm sorry, Hannah. I left their house with a check in my pocket, but no relief. For weeks afterward, I jumped at every knock on a door. Even now, years later, I still remember his words, the way he leaned in close and said, "Never know who's watching." I never house sat again. I never trusted a quiet street the way I once did, because sometimes the danger isn't strangers on the highway or headlines on the news. Sometimes it's the man across the street, the one everyone whispers about, the one who smiles too wide. And once you've seen him pressed against the glass, you never really forget. Trust your instincts. When something feels wrong, it usually is. We're taught to be polite, to give people the benefit of the doubt. But ignoring that uneasy feeling can put you in real danger. Safety matters more than manners, and the wrong kind of neighbor can change your life forever.